For National Adoption Awareness Month, we've teamed up with our friends at Bonfire. At Bonfire, they do a wonderful job of making fundraising easily accessible for all of us. Whether you're a designer or prefer customizing a template, you can design shirts, hats, totes, and more to sell to your community. They even have a paid design service if you'd rather have a professional designer help bring your ideas to life. You promote your Bonfire fundraising campaign to your community, then your supporters purchase products and can even leave additional donations to your journey. Bonfire then prints and ships your products directly to your sponsors. In honor of National Adoption Awareness Month, Bonfire is offering you a special promotion. Visit bonfire.com/adoptwell to create a campaign and get an extra dollar for every item sold up to $100 because you and I both know that every dollar counts. Welcome to the Adopt Well podcast, where we discuss helpful topics for anyone touched by adoption. I'm your host, Macy Peralt, here with my co-host, friend, and fellow adoptive mama, Amy Bagwell. We're so glad you joined us today. We recently asked adoptive parents, adoptees, and birth parents what they wish their friends and family knew about adoption. So today we're going to be sharing their responses with you. Before we dive in, we have to just give our famous disclaimer that every single situation is different because every person is different. Every adoption story is different. So if you're a friend or a family member of someone in an adoption triad, definitely use this episode as a place to start. But just know that this is not an exhaustive list, and your friend or family member might not even agree with everything. And I'm sure they have additional thoughts that they want to include. This is not everything you'll need to know, but we definitely hope it will be a great conversation starter for you. So Amy, let's dive in.
Yes, I feel like we have so many different viewpoints to cover. I'm really excited to hear about it from, I guess, lots of different angles. Also, one thing you said made me think about, we should tell everyone what an adoption triad is, because we mentioned that several times through here, but if you're new to the adoption world, you might not really know. So an adoption triad is basically consists of a birth family, the adoptive parents, and the adoptee.
Yes, for sure. Good call. And I feel like this is just really important for friends and family to understand. You guys hold a lot of power in the life of someone who's touched by adoption, whether that be the birth parent or the adoptee, or even the adoptive parent. I know that I am an adoptive mom, and I so appreciate when my friends and family educate themselves because I am not the only one raising my son. So I want everyone who's going to be around him to know how to do this thing well and support him throughout his whole life. So anyway, kudos to those of you who are listening for even caring and taking the time.
Yes, for sure. And we hope this is helpful. I know somebody most likely sent this to you if you are a friend or family member. So we hope that this is helpful. And I know it means a lot to whoever sent it to you, just the fact that you're listening. So let's go. You ready to dive in?
I'm ready.
Okay. I'll take the first one. So the first person said, there really are so many more stories being written than just our own. And that's a short sentence, but it's so true that a lot of times when you see, specifically, the first thing that came to mind is like a hopeful adoptive couple, someone who's waiting to adopt. All you see in the moment is that couple, but on the other side of things, there's someone who is going through the hard decision-making process of whether or not to make an adoption plan for their child.
Yeah, definitely. That's so true. And then like an international adoption, or if someone is trying to maybe adopt a child who is in foster care and their parents' rights have been relinquished, there's a lot of pain and hurt on the other side of that. So while people might be excited for a child to join a family, they also need to acknowledge the fact that there's a lot of grief and trauma happening on the other side, regardless of which adoption route someone is taking.
Yeah, that's so true.
Yeah, definitely. And I know that always helps me when I just remind myself, I'm excited about X, Y, and Z, but someone else on the other side of the same situation could be feeling some hurt.
True.
Yeah. Okay, number 2. Adoptive parents are not heroes, and our kids aren't lucky to have us. This is a very well meaning thing that people say, but our kids are a blessing to us, and we are really grateful for the opportunity to be their parents. So I know that is a great response. And I know for me, I've talked to a lot of adoptees who shared that when people were constantly telling them how lucky they were, they felt like any painful or hard feelings that they had weren't valid. And then I've also heard that they felt indebted to their adoptive parents.
Yeah, that's so hard. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's almost like you might feel blessed, and that's up to each adoptee for sure to decide how they feel about it. But yes, they're blessed to be in the family they're in, hopefully if they're in a good situation, but that doesn't mean they were lucky to go through being torn from their first family, no matter what the situation was.
Yeah. That's a good
Yeah.
perspective to share. Okay. So we saw several people wrote in something similar to what we're about to read off. I feel like this was a very popular response in general to what you would want your friends and families to know. But what someone specifically said is there are things that we don't share with you, not because we don't trust you, or not even because we don't want to, but we hold some info tight for our kids to know first one day. Some of you, however, will be the ones that we go to as our safe place, the ones who know all the backstory. So please actually be that safe place. So, just to
Mhm.
expound upon that a little, we've talked about it here on the podcast and on Instagram before, but we don't talk a lot about our specific kids' stories because, again, that's their story to tell. Their birth families, they have a story to tell as well. We don't need, as adoptive parents, to be the one to share all that information. So, we hold that tight to the chest, don't always have those conversations. However, some of our dearest friends or dearest family members, we may tell more to than we would, you know, the average Joe. So that means we expect you to be our safe place. And a way that you can be safe is one, don't tell other people.
Yeah.
And the other thing comes to mind, Macy, I'm sure you have other thoughts to add too. But the other thing that really comes to mind is to be like a judgment-free zone. If we share information that I guess I could say like maybe we are disappointed about or hurtful, don't judge us for how we feel about it. Don't judge our kids for maybe what they've experienced. Don't judge their birth families for some choices they may have made along the way. Just listen and love us.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so, so true. Ultimately, I always say I don't want my son, who is an adoptee, to be the last one to the party.
Yep.
So if you're my friend, you're my mom, you're my aunt, whoever you are, and I have told you things, or if someone has told you things about their adoption story, don't go just telling other people. And especially don't go up to a child who maybe doesn't even know all of the details of their story yet. If you know details that might be hard for them to process, let their parents be the one to tell them those things.
Yeah. Great
Yeah.
advice.
All right, next. Know that regardless of what side of the triad we're on, we carry some heavy things that we may not be able to talk openly about. So true.
Yeah, we could probably dive into scenarios for all three sides of the triad there, but I think we can just let that one speak for itself.
Yeah, for sure. And this is something where it never hurts to ask questions. It never hurts for you to be like, hey, how are you doing? You could ask, how is your adoption going? But you could also just be like, how are you feeling about your adoption? Is there anything specific I can be praying for you about? I'm always here if you want to talk. I hope you know that I'm a safe place. I hope you know that I can protect your story with you. I just want you to know that you can trust me. I know adoption is beautiful at times, but I know it can also be hard. So um, I just want to be a loving and supportive friend or family member however I can.
Yeah, that's great advice for
Yeah.
anyone.
Yeah. Okay,
Okay.
go ahead.
Yes, this next one, I, amen and amen and amen. So, someone said discipline will look a lot different for some of us, specifically as adoptive parents and how we discipline our children who are adopted.
Mm.
Um, just know that we're not letting our kids off easy. Our kids may have special needs that you can't see, and past trauma will also sometimes play into how we parent. Trust that we're doing the best we can to be the best parents we can be with all the information we know. And that is tough because a lot of times as adoptive parents, you may not know what your child has previously experienced. So you're
Yeah.
just kind of having to watch them and listen to them and see how they respond to certain things. Um, to be, a great disciplinarian. I remember when our daughter first came home, this was something Charlie and I didn't know, how to discipline a toddler, period, because we're new parents, but also her specifically, we're like, man, how do we do this? So it was just, we just did the best we could. We talked to our doctor. We did a lot of just correction with our words for a while, very kindly. And as we got to know her better, we got to know how she responded to things better. A few years later, we've come strides in that regard, but it definitely was a tough topic, I guess, to figure out how to handle appropriately.
Absolutely. Because I think a lot of times for a lot of families, they're very concerned with first time obedience and,
Yep.
kids not asking why, not any pushback. And the thing is, sometimes our goal is just to make sure that we're attaching and connecting with our children. And we're going to say yes every time we can if it helps us connect. And we are not going to punish them. And maybe we're not going to go stick our kid in a timeout if they've had neglect in their past. And maybe we don't believe in spanking if our child has come from trauma. There's just
Right. It's
so
endless.
much.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I feel like that could be a whole nother story. But ultimately, just trust that the adoptive parent is doing the best that they can and that they've done their research and they know things that maybe the average Joe doesn't.
Yep.
So, yeah, for sure. Because I know I did not know any of that beforehand. So just give a lot of grace. Not even, my husband and I were out to dinner one time, and there was this little boy running away from his parents in the store. And he was probably 4 or 5. He was older, and his parents were just chasing after him and yelling at him to come back. And I remember people looking at them so judgmentally. And I just looked at my husband and I was like, for all we know, I mean, they could have just adopted him, or, he could have past trauma, or he could have special needs. And here, everybody's just acting like this is just some horribly unruly, rebellious child, but no one knows what is going on behind the scenes. And so just give people grace wherever you go. You never know the whole story.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, next one. Oh, wow. This is a good one. Adoptees deserve to know where they came from. Open adoption is very misunderstood. Um, this is so true, and those are kind of two very different things, but they do play well together. So it's so true. I remember reading recently about how many people have done DNA tests lately, millions and millions of people. And the majority of those were not even adoptees, which just shows that it's a natural thing to want to know where you came from. And so, same for adoptees. And so, in the past, adoption was a pretty secret thing. And I think a lot of adoptees were kind of just expected to just be thankful for their adoptive family and, well, don't worry about your first family. Don't worry about where you came from because this is where you are now. But ultimately, they deserve to know as much as they possibly can. What do you think about that, Amy?
Yeah, I mean, I saw someone else say something on the post that we did about this, but they said it's not like a Lifetime movie. Open adoption is not always like a Lifetime movie. So what
Mhm.
you see on TV or what you've, heard this like distant story is not, or I say on TV, honestly nowadays, let's just say social media, but it doesn't always play out like that. Open adoption can look very different for lots of different people, but yes, I feel like not just adoptee, every person deserves to know where they came from. Like you said, that's why we all are dying to know, what percentage our heritage is.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so, so true. And we can touch on open adoption a little bit more here in a bit. You can
For
do the
sure.
next one.
Okay, this one is plain and simple, but I think you'll get the point. Every adoption is different. No two stories are the same. So, just like we were saying a while ago, what you see on the movies, what you see on social media, that might be true for that person. It does not mean that you can just take that truth and assume that it is true for someone else that you may know.
It's so true. I see this a lot with adoptees just from the outside looking in. I obviously cannot speak to their experiences, but from what I've seen a lot of people say, like, well, I know someone who's adopted and they're just fine. They're
Right.
happy, they're thankful. And I'm like, that's really good. But that doesn't mean that my child can't, you know, be sad about the fact that he is not with his first family if he goes through that someday. You don't want to discount someone's story just because of another one that you've heard.
Yeah, agree.
Yeah, for sure. Here's a good one. Adoption is equal parts, or even, I don't even know if equal parts is the right thing to say. But adoption is both beautiful and it's broken. And so, a lot of times, people who have not been directly impacted by adoption, they just think it's this beautiful thing, it's this happy ending, it's this big redemption, and they just don't know that it's actually really hard and it comes from loss, and it can be very hard to walk through both. As a birth parent, I'm not a birth parent, but I've talked to many of them who have said that people are constantly telling them, "Oh, you're so brave. You're so selfless. You should be so proud of the decision you made. And aren't you so happy that you did this amazing thing?" And while I do agree with all of those things, that could be really hard as a birth mom to then be like, "Yes, but I'm still grieving. And that was still my child that I placed for adoption." And so, same for adoptees. Are a lot of adoptees very thankful that they get to be in the adoptive family they do? I'm sure there are many who are. But that doesn't mean it's still not hard. And
Right.
even as adoptive parents, it is so beautiful. But oh my gosh, adoption has just broken my heart in so many ways that I never expected. And so, one of the things that I learned recently was that when someone tells you they're adopted, instead of saying, "Oh, wow, that's amazing," you could say, "Wow, thank you for telling me that." Because it is beautiful and it is amazing, but it's also comes from brokenness. And I've talked to a lot of adoptees, and when I've said that to them, they're so taken aback by the fact that I didn't just have the like, "That is incredible that you were adopted. You are so lucky. Good for you." You know, they
Yeah.
can't believe that someone would be like, "Wow, thanks for telling me that," and then
Yeah.
asking, like, "When were you adopted?" or whatever.
Yeah.
So, anyway, it's very hard to explain if you haven't walked it, but just know it's beautiful, but it's also broken. And it's hard, but it's also amazing. It's a whirlwind.
I was just thinking, I know that you and I both have talked to so many adoptive parents recently, it seems like, who have recently adopted, and it's always without fail. I mean, I can't think of one exception to this of the people that I've talked to recently who have adopted a child and not been like overjoyed and completely wrecked emotionally with
Yeah.
just the sadness that it brings that they weren't necessarily expecting, but the joy that they feel when they hold their child. It's just, it is so conflicting. But we could get hung up on that for a long time.
we could. We could. But yeah.
Okay, let's move on. Okay, so this next one is I think that something that people don't talk about a lot, but disrupted adoption is really hard, but please don't badmouth the mamas. So, if you're not sure what that means, basically a disrupted adoption is when an adoption plan doesn't happen as planned, essentially. So, for example, maybe an expectant mother has asked someone to adopt her child, and then she decides to parent, she changes her mind, and ultimately, that's a great thing because we always want to support anyone who decides to parent their child, of course. But what this person is saying, and I can understand, is that that's still hard on the person who was planning to adopt that child. It doesn't mean that we think it's wrong. It just means that it's hard. So give a little space for grace there. They obviously aren't going to say that it's super hard because they don't want to badmouth the mom who decided to parent her child, of course. Um, but it is just that is a tricky piece to adoption that I don't think we talk too much about, you know?
Yeah. Absolutely. Okay, so the next one is attaching can take time regardless of age. Don't be offended if we decide to be the primary caretaker of our kiddo for a while, even post placement. That is so, so true. There's actually something called cocooning, which is exactly that. When a family brings a baby or a child home and they just stay within their home or within their little circle as a family for a while, and they don't have a lot of guests over and they don't have a lot of company, and they don't go out a lot, and they just take the time to be the one to meet their child's needs so that their child learns to trust them and learns that they are mom and they are dad. And obviously, there are varying ways that people do that. But yeah, I kind of find myself doing that with all of my kids, really. But I'm always telling my husband, I know I want to get a babysitter, I want to go on a date night, but can we go after bed? Because I want to be the one to feed them their bottles and I want to be the one to put them to bed, just because those are the such good connection times.
Yeah, and
Um,
if you've never read up on attachment and adoption, I would encourage you to just kind of Google that later if you want to learn more about attachment because it is literally crucial in the development of a child. So these are super, super fundamental times. And I know
mm,
a parent, I've heard of some parents even saying that when they do like a meal plan or something and people bring over food after you bring home a baby, which is always appreciated, that they
yes.
just ask the person to leave the food on the step. And that doesn't mean they don't want to see them. It just means where if you've got a new child added to your family, it could be really confusing for that kid to see a new person coming over every night, figuring out, okay, wait, am I going to go with them? Am I going to stay here? So don't be offended. Just know we're trying to do what's best for our kids, even though it seems maybe a little different from societal norms.
Yeah, totally.
Okay, let's figure out where we are. I've lost my spot here. Oh, okay. This was this is great. This was sent in by a birth mom and she
Mm.
said, just because we're grieving does not mean that we should close the adoption.
Oh,
That's
so true.
so true. I don't want to put words in her mouth by any means. But I would add on there that grief is not a bad thing.
Mm.
We did a whole episode on birth mother grief cycle earlier in this season, so I would encourage you to go back and listen to it if you haven't. Um, but grieving, man, it can look like so many different things because it is a cycle and it does change. How it plays out changes. So I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth by any means, like I said, but we'll just take that quote verbatim as it is. Just because we're grieving doesn't mean we should close the adoption. So please, 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 if you're close with a birth parent, mother or father, don't suggest that they close the adoption just because they're having a hard time with it.
Yeah. I think that goes probably for adoptees too, I would think. I mean, again, I don't want to put words in people's mouths, but I'm thankful that she shared that
Me
for
too.
sure. Yeah. Okay. Please do not talk badly about birth parents, not to strangers, not to your best friend, and especially not to the adoptee, especially if they are a child.
Yes.
Doesn't
I
matter.
hope that goes without saying, but
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it doesn't matter what you've seen, what you've heard, whatever. Please just try to be nice, right?
be nice. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Um, let's this is a sensitive topic, but let's talk about the appropriate way to ask someone if they are going to have biological children. I
Yeah.
know, Macy, I probably get this more than you because I don't have biological children, and I've heard this question many times. And, I don't take offense to it because I think it's well-meaning, but people will say, "Do you guys want to have kids of your own?" And I'm
Mm,
like, "Are you kidding me?" Especially if Lee's around. It's like, uh,
she
next.
is my own.
But
Exactly.
no, it's not a bad question to ask. If you wanted to use the phrase biological, that's a different thing. But you know, do you and your husband want to have kids biologically? That would maybe be more an appropriate way to ask that question. But I don't know that there's really a need to ask it, period.
I agree. I agree.
We'll
Man,
let you know.
it's tough.
If
It's
you see a
tough.
pregnancy announcement, then you'll know. Until then, just keep to
Yeah.
yourself. Just kidding, just kidding.
Well, and I even remember, and I'm sure you felt this way even before you adopted when you didn't have any children, but even when you're going through infertility, it can be really hard when people are constantly saying, so when are you going to have a baby? So when
Oh,
you
for
guys
sure.
have kids,
Oh, yeah.
and
I
I
went for
know
years and
people
years.
mean well, I know that they do, and there are definitely ways to ask, but just check your heart and make sure you're not just being nosy would be, I guess, the biggest thing.
Mm,
But asking because
that's
you
good
really care.
advice.
Okay, next. Oh my gosh. I'm very passionate about this one. Please do not label our child as the quote unquote adopted one. And please don't treat our biological versus adopted kids differently. Ultimately, we have to put our kids first. And the last thing that we want is to have to distance ourselves from the people that we love, AKA you people who are listening. So this is so tough. So I, Macy, have 4 children, and 3 of them are biological children. One of them we adopted. And this has happened to us already, where say we are standing in the lobby at church and it's my husband and I and our 4 kids, and we're talking to somebody and someone new comes over and they say, "Hey, this is Greg and Macy. These are their kids, Porter, Brighton, and Jay, and this is the adopted one. His name is Judah." No, 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 no. Please do not single our
Oh
kids
my
out. They are
gosh.
all my children, okay? And just think about it, how that sounds to the kid. Now, thankfully, my son is young right now, but I'm sure this will happen regardless when he's older, unfortunately. Just because sometimes people don't think before they talk. They obviously don't do it to be malicious or anything, but just you do not have to single our kids out at all. You don't have to. Even I talked to one friend who said that her grandmother always did this to be nice because she was so proud. Like these little kids that were in the family that were adopted, it was like this special thing to her. And so whenever they would go anywhere, she'd be like, "Oh yeah, these are all my grandkids and these are the adopted ones."
Oh, wow.
Like really proud about it. But ultimately
Wow.
the kids still felt so singled out. And so our kids are just our kids. We don't need to single them out.
For sure. Yeah, I obviously haven't experienced that because if you don't know me, we have one child currently and she's adopted, so no one really brings that up, but I can only imagine the rage I would feel if they did.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, Someone else said it means a lot to us when you ask about our adoption. Some questions that you could ask are, how are you feeling about your adoption? Is there anything I can be praying about with or for you? Or what are you learning right now? And is there anything I can be doing to learn too? I love that last question
Mm.
because I feel like I personally would always have the answer for that. And I love anytime any of my friends have said anything to me about learning about adoption or even like for us specifically learning about like a multi-ethnic family even, it means so much to me.
Yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree. Okay, another one an adoptee sent in is I would love for my friends and family to know how lonely it is. Sometimes you feel isolated, even in a room full of people. I would also love for them to know that there's nothing that they can do to fix it. And instead of trying to, they can just acknowledge how difficult it is to be an adoptee and provide support. Mm, so thankful they shared that.
I know that really is great advice. It's hard to hear because you always want to fix it, especially as a parent, but it's I can I can totally see how that is very true.
Absolutely.
Okay, the next one is kind of funny. But someone said, "No, I'm not making up the cost, and I do not know why it costs so much."
We
I
could do a whole episode about
Yeah,
why it costs so much or why it should not cost so much sometimes, but I
right.
think,
That is
that's
so
not the
true though.
goal today.
Anytime that anyone asks questions about fundraising or how much we have left to raise or something like that, it's like, why does it cost so much? Oh my, it's like, I don't know. I just know it's going to
Just
cost a lot of
believe
money and
me.
it'll be worth it and it goes to these good things. Just believe me. I don't know. I don't
Yeah,
want to get into a PowerPoint right now, but
right.
it's funny, but it's true.
Yes, for sure. Someone else said, "We love our kids' birth families, even if we don't agree with their choices, but conversation about it is off the table." So we've already kind of touched on this anyway, but It's so true. Amy and I talk all the time about just the connection and the love that we have for our kids' birth families. And it's unlike anything I even know how to describe. But I think it's just important for people to know that we love them.
Right.
And
And
ultimately they're a part of our child.
yeah. And even if, like this person said, even if we don't necessarily agree with something that they're doing or that they've done, that doesn't mean we're ever going to talk badly about them. And we would really, really, really appreciate it if you didn't either.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, the next one we saved the best for last. Not really, but it means a lot to us when you educate yourself instead of relying on us to do that. Obviously, for Macy and I, we are very passionate about educating people about adoption. So I know that I personally do love educating my friends and family about it. But like we mentioned earlier, anytime that someone has come to us having already learned something or asking questions about something they heard, man, it gets me so excited.
Yeah, I agree. I just thought of another one too, Amy.
Oh, good.
So we did a post on Instagram about when people say real parents instead of saying birth parents or biological parents. So, for example, if someone's talking to me and they say, "Hey, where are his real parents?" Or if they're
Mhm.
talking to an adoptee and they say, "Where's your real mom?" Or "Who's your real mom? Do you talk to your real dad?" So when I hear this as an adoptive mom, I feel in no way threatened by people calling my child's birth parents his real parents because I know what they're trying to say. And honestly, birth parents are real parents too. So you're not going to find me being that adoptive mom who is fully just like, I'm his real mom. And they're not. No, we're all real parents. All of us are birth parents and adoptive parents. I'm the one who parents him every day. But, I just believe that we need to remember that adoption is literally a situation where a child has two mothers and two fathers, except for obviously in single parent adoption situations. But I just believe it's so important for the world to understand how this can be perceived by the adoptee, especially as a child.
Yeah.
So when people use the word real, when they're only talking about a child's biological parent, it can be taken as them saying that the adoptive parents aren't the child's real parent, thus saying that the child's not really a part of the family. So this can just be really confusing and painful for the adoptee to process. So we are real parents, and that is the role that we've been chosen for many times by their birth parents. And so we're the ones that are taking on the everyday parenting and disciplining and caretaking, and we're all real parents. This isn't co-parenting. So if you're in a conversation where a distinction is required, instead of saying real parent, you can just say birth parent or biological parent.
That's
So,
good. That's good clarity. And I know you had lots of great Instagram posts a while back just on language and the conversations around use this word instead of that word. So if you don't already follow us on Instagram, you can do that at AdoptWell and scroll back through some great this or that language things. But we hope that you found this episode helpful. I know that there are so many more topics where these came from. So like we said, if you just want to use this as a guide to have conversation with the people in your life who are part of an adoption triad, we would love for you to do that. The conversation does not have to be taboo.
yes, for sure. Well, with that, we'll wrap up season 1. So if this is your first time listening to an episode, we have 15 more waiting for you. But we're going to take a break and we're going to enjoy the holidays with our families, and we'll be back in January of 2020. For everyone who's left us a review over the past few months, thank you so much. They've meant so much to us. Thanks for joining us so we can all learn together how we can adopt well.